I never thought I'd find myself in such an unsettling situation, but there I was, called in the middle of the night to St. Mary's Hospital for a case that would make my skin crawl. My name is Dr. Richard Hill, a specialist in psychiatry. I've dealt with numerous cases of trauma and catatonia, but nothing could prepare me for what I was about to encounter. The call came from a colleague, Dr. Susan Baker, who was clearly distressed. "Richard, we need you at St. Mary's. We've got a woman here, catatonic, and there's something terribly wrong. She's bleeding from under her chin. We need your expertise." I arrived at the hospital within half an hour, the urgency in Susan's voice pushing me to speed through the deserted streets. When I walked into the examination room, I saw her, a woman in her late 20s, perhaps early 30s, sitting motionless on the bed. Her pale gray eyelids were shut tight, and a bandage was placed under her chin, already stained with fresh blood. "What's her name?" I asked Susan. "We don't know yet." She hasn't said a word, but she was found wandering the streets, disoriented and bleeding. We've applied fresh gauze, but it doesn't seem to stop. I approached the woman cautiously. Her presence was unsettling, her silence more so. I reached out to touch her arm, a gesture of reassurance. "Ma'am, can you hear me? My name is Dr. Richard Hill. I'm here to help you." Her lips moved ever so slightly, a whisper escaping them. "They took me." My heart skipped a beat. "Who took you?" The lights took me." I spent hours with her, trying to coax more information. She kept her eyes closed, but her words, though sporadic, were chilling. She spoke of walking home one night and being enveloped in a bright light. When she awoke, she was in a sterile room, surrounded by figures that weren't human. "It was for the good of humanity," she muttered. "They said it was necessary." Her voice was distant, as if she were reliving a memory rather than speaking to me. The bleeding under her chin persisted, soaking through the bandages no matter how many times we replaced them. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. "Can you tell me what year it is?" I asked, trying to anchor her to the present. 1953, she replied without hesitation. I exchanged a concerned glance with Susan. "Are you sure? It's actually 2024. She shook her head slightly, the motion causing fresh blood to seep from the wound. "No, it's 1953. I was just walking home from the diner." The more she talked, the more it became apparent that she believed she was still living in the 1950s. I decided to contact the police, thinking there might be a missing persons report from that time that could give us some answers. The police arrived sooner than expected. Officer James Carter walked in, holding a file. His face was pale as he handed it to me. "You might want to take a look at this," he said, his voice shaky. I opened the file and my blood ran cold. The photograph was unmistakable. It was her, the same woman sitting in front of me. The report was dated July 3rd, 1953. She had been declared missing 70 years ago. "How is this possible?" I muttered. "That's not all," Officer Carter said. "There's a note in the file from one of the officers who investigated her disappearance. It says, 'Proceed with caution, possibly dangerous.' I'm going to need some alone time with her to get to the bottom of this." I told Officer Carter and Dr. Baker. They protested, but told me they would both be out in the hallway making phone calls, and they would enter the room the instant anything happened. Realizing I might not have as much time with this woman, I needed to act fast. She didn't speak to anyone else, but she seemed to want to open up to me. Now finally alone, she began talking again. Her breathing grew labored. They did things, painful things, but they said it was for the greater good, for humanity's survival. The blood from under her chin started to flow more freely, and to my horror, I noticed it was also seeping from the corners of her eyes and nostrils. I stepped back, a sense of dread washing over me. I felt a cold shiver as I watched the blood trickle down her face. The woman's breathing grew more ragged, each exhale a struggle. I was about to call for a nurse when she suddenly stopped moving altogether. Her head slowly lifted, and for the first time her eyes opened. I recoiled in horror. Her eyes were not human. They were large, black, and lifeless. They seemed to absorb all light, pulling me into their depths. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My body felt frozen, completely under her control. With a slow, deliberate motion, she reached up and tore at the flesh of her face. It peeled away, revealing a grotesque, alien visage beneath. Her skin was a sickly gray, and her mouth twisted into a sinister smile. "And now, we need you to come with us," she said, her voice now a chilling echo that seemed to reverberate inside my skull. For humanity's survival, I felt an overwhelming compulsion to move closer, my mind screaming in protest, but my body betraying me. Just as I was about to touch her, the door burst open. Officer Carter and 2 other policemen rushed in, guns drawn, only to be greeted by an empty room.